Hi, I'm James Davis, and I'm a coaching psychologist. I'm one half of the Midlife Mentors, which is a business I run with my wife. We got into this basically through running transformational retreats in Spain. And we noticed that, like, a lot of our clients presenting with similar kind of symptoms and issues, and being midlife ourselves, we really wanted to dive into this. So we kind of geeked out on all the research, looked at things like the psychology at midlife, how our hormones, neurotransmitters are changing, not just our physicality, but our emotional state, our psychology. Looked at things like gut health, nutrition, movement. So today, we specialize in helping midlife people basically embrace a healthier, happier midlife and beyond. And we do that through a coaching program, one-to-one coaching. And we also go into organizations and talk to them around issues around the menopause, andropause, which is the age-related testosterone decline for men, things like relationships, effective communication, managing stress, burnout, lots and lots of things. So really pleased to be here today on this podcast talking about hormones, aging, and anything else that comes up for us.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So actually something we haven't discussed yet at all on the podcast is male, or with a focus on male hormones. And you just mentioned, did you say, I didn't catch it.
Andropause.
Andropause.
Yeah.
Please tell me about that.
So andropause could be also categorized as age-related testosterone decline. So for women, we know that the primary sex hormones are estrogen and progesterone, and we know that they'll kind of peak in your 30s, and then they start to fall away, fluctuating as they fall away as you go through perimenopause and menopause. For men, our primary sex hormone is testosterone. That will peak in late adolescence or early 20s, and then it declines at a steady rate of 1 to 2% per year, which doesn't sound a lot, but when you're compounding that, by the time you're in your 50s, your testosterone levels could be 30 to 50% lower than they were in your 20s. And this can start to have an impact for men on psychology, libido, physicality. So there are a number of effects that occur. Testosterone is responsible for new tissue regeneration, specifically like muscle mass, but also responsible for things like confidence, focus, energy, obviously libido as well. So symptoms can include things like noticing you're putting on more weight around your midsection, that you're losing your muscle mass, losing strength, that you're having trouble focusing, you're tired, trouble sleeping, libido could be fluctuating or disappear completely. There's a whole host of issues. Now, of course, I think a lot of those, a lot of men's identity is kind of wrapped up in their physical self. So this in turn can lead to further psychological issues. But we should also be mindful that as we age, for both men and women, the hormone and neurotransmitter changes we experience do affect our psychology as well.
Very interesting. So, you know, when people say like they know somebody's having a midlife crisis, is that related to hormones? Is that specifically a testosterone focused hormone? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so the midlife crisis is really interesting. So the first reported use of it was actually a psychotherapist back, I think, in the late 50s. He spoke at a conference and wrote a paper about it, where he kind of got the term midlife crisis and talked about, like, he was looking down the inevitable slope of the hill towards death. But he later on, actually, interestingly, went on to admit at the time he was quite depressed. And this matches with modern psychology research about something called the happiness curve, which is at, I think, between like our 40s, mid 40s to 50s is our peak unhappiness time. But actually after that, we start to become more and more happy. Now, is it purely down to hormones? No, obviously they will play an effect because, for women, menopause can be hugely disruptive and cause all kinds of symptoms. For men, it could be that testosterone is low. But I think more than that, midlife is a time where we naturally take stock. We're kind of like, okay, am I where I want to be? If I am, is it actually what I actually really wanted? If I'm not, how can I course correct? What goes on? Do I have the things I want in my life? So it's quite a big, I think, psychological transformation to occur. And it's unfortunate we end up with the term midlife crisis, and the kind of the tired stereotype of it is like, the boarding guy in the sports car with the young model next to him. And that's not really that helpful. I mean, we always like to say it's not a midlife crisis. It's time for a midlife transformation, a midlife opportunity, because we can work with the changes that are going on once we're aware of what they are, and actually redefine what we want for the next part of our life. And I think the last thing I say on that is, when we think of midlife as well, if you're my age and you think back to when you watched, sitcoms and TV, when maybe in like the 80s and stuff, people who were in their 40s and 50s were already portrayed as being quite old. You know, they'd be like, have cardigans and their shirts buttoned all the way up and they're quite dowdy. Whereas obviously now 50, 60, 70-year-olds, they're still working out, going out clubbing. And that's the cultural side. But the other side is, you know, we are living longer. We don't have to go back even 100 years that, you know, what happens at menopause? It's the end of a woman's reproductive cycle. But actually, being brutal, women didn't expect to live much longer beyond that, you know, 100 years ago. And similarly for men were dying, like, you know, if you made it to 50, 60, you were doing well. Obviously now with advances in medical technology, more food, etc., we're living a lot longer, which is why I think we're seeing more interest in like what interventions can we make around this time of life to ensure that it can be a healthy, happy time and we can like still embrace what we have left, which is, you know, it really is a midlife because we probably have another 40, 50 years ahead of us.
Absolutely. I've actually discussed that a lot on the podcast, is how we live in an aging population where currently the statistics are at men's average living age or length of time is 84.5 years, I think is around that, and women is 86.25, I think. Don't quote me. I think it's very close to those numbers. But when that data was put in place, I think that was something like maybe even like 10 years ago. But if you start to look at our grandparents, they're living way past 85. Yeah. So we're looking at people in their 90s, and I know a lot. Sorry, my dog decided to walk around. We're looking at people in their 90s. You're seeing these amazing personal stories about Janet, who's just reached her 105th birthday, you know. And I said to somebody yesterday, they said, "Oh, I'm turning 50." And I said, "Oh, that's amazing. You've reached halfway through your life. You've still got so much of your life left." And it really took them back, and they were like, "What are you talking about?" Because everybody's got this such a negative mindset of how of what that 50 looks like. Like frail, in pain, can't do many things anymore, kind of like losing that sense of purpose, which is totally untrue and unrealistic. And I do think the media has a huge part to play in that. And then similarly, I had another conversation with my husband, and he was saying it all changes after 30. And I said to him, "What are you talking about? By the time you get to 30, you've only technically been working for 10 years of your life. The rest of your life you're at school." If you look at it like that and break it down, it makes much more sense. Like, there's only so much you can achieve in 10 years of having a career. If you haven't reached what you perceive as your success level or your peak, and you're saying that you wanted to reach that by 30, that's so much pressure on yourself because you're still so young. But anyway, I'm going on to a little bit of a tangent about that. But what I'd love to know more about is how it can affect us on a day-to-day life in terms of those hormone fluctuations, and maybe also maybe touch upon relationships and how those hormones can play a huge part in relationship strain.
Yeah. So I think first up, women like to be a lot more in touch with this because obviously they have a monthly cycle that's running, and you'll know that your emotions will fluctuate around that cycle. So that's just an example of how powerful hormones are. So hormones are essentially chemical transmitters that go through the body. They're attached to every single organ. Every organ has like site responders for hormones. So they do impact our physicality, our emotionality, our psychology. So men, I think, it's a lot less clear. We have the same experience of cycles, but as we age, obviously, we know how disruptive perimenopause can be, menopause, what comes with that. We know we're not going to dive into that on this podcast. But with testosterone, it can be quite debilitating. If a man suddenly finds that they're not strong, they're not as focused, they haven't got the confidence to get up and go, they're losing focus at work, The strength is disappearing. Maybe they're putting on excess body fat they don't want to, and libido, of course, can be a big issue for a lot of people as well. If they're struggling for libido, that can have a psychological impact. So it's interesting where it can impact relationships. Is, I think, up until very recently, there hasn't been much awareness of either the menopause or the andropause. So, of course, if you've got the female partner going through perimenopause and menopause, and the male partner's going through andropause, but neither of them really knows what's going on, that could create a huge distance between them. We have to boil it down to something simple like intimacy, right? One person might say like, "Oh, I do feel like I want to be intimate," and the other one's like, "No, I'm just not interested," and that can create an instant kind of divide. So the way you want to bridge that is twofold, really, by understanding what could be going on with our hormones and the processes that can form. But the second one is communication, being really open and vulnerable with each other. Go, hey, you know what? This is what's going on for me at the moment. This is how I'm feeling. So it's not a rebuff. I'm not rejecting you, because we have to be really careful. Rejection is one of the deepest human wounds. And that comes back to our hunter-gatherer times when, if you were cast out the tribe, it literally did mean death. You wouldn't survive on your own. So this is why we find rejection of any kind, even in the modern world, so hurtful. It's like a deep human memory. So it's about having those open conversations and finding that balance together and working through it together. I think that's so important.
You briefly touched upon muscle mass loss, and I am really interested in that side of aging. So my background is clinical exercise, and mainly working with people over the age of 60, and the majority of the people that I work with are much later on in their life, 70s, 80s, 90s. And we talk about sarcopenia a lot, and why they are experiencing weakness, soreness, aches and pains, and it's not always directly related to a long-term health condition. It is just aging. And then how hormones come into play is something I've only recently started to learn about. But how does that, what are the scientific processes that happen in terms of muscle loss from a hormonal perspective? And how can that affect us on a day-to-day life as we age from midlife and then beyond?
Yeah, so you're right. The name for it is sarcopenia, and that's naturally occurring age-related muscle loss. That's primarily due to the drop in two hormones: human growth hormone. So that's what gives us our adolescent growth spurt, and again, that just starts to trail off at a steady rate, and testosterone. So we're getting lower and lower. Think of the fuel that builds new muscles. It's getting lower and lower in the tank. So there's not the chemical messages going, build new muscle, maintain muscle. So it starts to, if we do nothing, it starts to erode. Now, the impact of that is kind of manifold, right? You'll know, working with elderly patients, when strength goes, it becomes a frailty issue. And the statistics, I think someone's over, you might know this better than me, if someone's over 60 and they have a fall and break something, their mortality risk jumps over 60%. Now, if someone is doing regular cardiovascular and resistance training, they actually lower their mortality risk by between 20 and 30%. Why that? If you take the example of a fall, right? If you've been not looking after your muscle health and you have that stumble, you haven't got the strength, you haven't got the sense of balance because you haven't been doing the exercise, you haven't got the strength to catch yourself, you go down, you break something, recovery is so much longer, it's a whole nightmare. If you have been training, because training does work on your balance coordination as well, you're probably like, oh, catch yourself on the fall. There's the strength in your legs to stop you falling over. You've avoided the fall altogether. And so how we can maintain muscle mass as we age is by resistance training. Now, my resistance training does not have to mean going into the gym and lifting weights. I'd say that if you're looking for the evidence-backed way, that is ideal, because you can generate a hormonal response in terms of raising testosterone and human growth hormone temporarily after each session. But just doing something simple at home, using body weight exercises, simple things like doing press-ups off a wall if you can't go down to the floor, using things like tins of baked beans or water bottles for exercise. We just need to be working those muscles. And the science is we need to be making them twice a week to maintain where they are. Ideally, we want to build new ones. When we build new ones, we're also going to get benefits, because muscle is what we call metabolically active, meaning it burns calories even at rest. This is another reason why we put on more weight as we age, right? Just from a metabolic perspective, as we carry less muscle on our frame, our metabolic rate is decreasing, but probably still eating and drinking the same amount. So that's stored as body fat instead. So there's lots of reasons to resistance train and add muscle. And I think, you know, there's an aesthetic one, but there's that really important one about aging and protecting your health and having strength. You can, it's incredible. We can predict mortality based on things like grip strength, you know. And a worrying trend actually is grip strength is decreasing again, because 100 years ago, many people were doing manual labor and now they're not. So it's simple things like that. But it is, I can't emphasize it enough. Everyone should be resistance training of some form or other twice a week just to maintain that muscular health.
Yeah. And I think it's great that you touched upon how exercise, and in particular strength training, impacts testosterone levels. And you mentioned that you see a slight increase post exercise or training. If, for example, you were training every day and you're doing, let's say, 30 minutes of strength training, would you start to see a long-term effect on that testosterone increase as you age? Or would it just maintain, or would it drop?
So it's a great question. There's always going to be a genetic factor which we can't predict, but the research suggests, you know, if you're training regularly, it will actually help raise your testosterone levels or keep your base rate higher than if you were doing no training at all. And that's just the training aspect. We can also, you know, look at our nutrition, things that we know are disruptive to the endocrine pathways. We can like minimize those in our diets. Like sugar is a really big one, for example. Move to more whole foods, etc., etc. Just by making lifestyle adjustments, it is possible to naturally raise your testosterone levels.
And what do you mean by endocrine pathways? Because that's not something we've discussed on the podcast yet.
So endocrine pathways is a technical term for the pathways that your hormones operate along. So it's your hormone system in your body. So there's a number of things in our environment and our food chain that are actually disruptive to hormone production. So we have certain kinds of pollutants, certain types of plastics will disrupt hormone production. We know that some GM altered foods have an impact on hormone levels in the body. Even stuff like air pollution can impact hormone levels. So there's lots of things at kind of micro level, some of which we can't control for, but plenty that we can. And sugar is a big one. Sugar is highly inflammatory for the brain, for the gut, for the body, and for the hormones.
And apart from nutrition, what would you say are the biggest lifestyle factors that impact hormone levels negatively?
Great question. I think lack of movement, lack of training. You know, if you're sedentary, that's going to have an impact. Poor diet, obviously. Things like smoking, alcohol. If your consumption's heavy, are also going to negatively impact your hormones as well.
Sure. And so as a result, if we just simplify that, if we're not exercising, if we're drinking a lot, let's just focus on those two for now. So we're super sedentary, we're not eating very well. So and let's say we've got a high sugary, high processed diet.
Yeah.
What is that going to look like on a person? Maybe physically, aesthetically, but also from a brain alertness point of view, and an emotional point of view as well.
So I'll give you like a really good example I come across all the time is with women that have gone to their GP and gone on HRT, and then they're like, well, I just, you know, I don't feel any different or I feel worse. I'm like, okay, but what have you changed around your lifestyle? And oh, no, nothing. I still like drink a bottle of wine every night and have pizza and takeaways 4 times a week, and I don't do any exercise. I'm like, okay, listen, you know, we do have modern technology, but it's nothing is a magic pill. We have to support it as lifestyle. If you are sitting around, you know, lots of sugar, lots of processed foods, not moving, what's it going to look like? You're going to be carrying like a lot of excess body fat. You're going to feel sluggish. Your gut health is going to be really poor. Your focus and concentration is going to be really poor. Generally, your quality of life is not going to be great compared to what it could be if you just made some really simple changes.
Yeah, and I think that's the key there around lifestyle changes, and it's something that I've discussed on many episodes before. The way that the podcast works is once a month we speak to an expert, for example you, but the other episodes are all made up on specific themes. So sometimes we just talk about like the top 10. Actually, my most listened to podcast episodes are the top 10 things you should be doing to live a healthy lifestyle. And then I think my second one is the top 10 things you should avoid to improve healthy aging, or something like that. So people are really interested in those areas. And we all know that exercise is important, but I think just saying you need to exercise more isn't going to actually make a difference to somebody. Because they know that, the science proves and shows that exercise is so important. But unless you understand why, okay, the first and the most obvious reason is fat loss, weight loss, that kind of area of things. But I really despise that. That's why people think about associate healthy eating and exercise to that side of health. Like, I'm like, okay, well, how is it affecting us on a day-to-day process? Do I have brain fog? Is it affecting my sleep patterns? And all of those things. So I guess to even delve deeper into why we need to exercise, why we need to eat better, and how that's going to affect our hormones specifically, is, can you go into more detail around the longer term effects of those things? So we've mentioned weight gain and brain fog and lack of alertness and all of those things, but how is that going to affect us if we stick to a consistent poor lifestyle like that over 40 years? What does that look like? And that could be anything. That could be long-term health conditions, but it could also just be mental health focused.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you made a really good point there, that I think unfortunately in this country we do seem to have this thing of like, I need to exercise to lose weight, and we've got this kind of like associating exercise with weight loss, and we need to turn that on its head. Exercise should just be something that we do because we know all the benefits from it, right? If you are doing nothing, what does life look like? It looks like type 2 diabetes. We know that is largely diet and lifestyle based. So it looks like probably you end up unable to get up out your sofa without help, having no energy to do stuff, very overweight, mental fog. Of course, that's going to lead to a lack of motivation, drive. You probably wonder why you're not achieving any of your goals that you set yourself in life. It's just a cascade effect. And what I'd like to actually tell listeners is, I think we live in a kind of culture and society where we think we've got to do that one big thing. If I can just find that one thing, the one magic thing, that's going to change everything for me. And it is not like that at all. Which is good news and bad news, right? So you're never going to find the one thing that's going to suddenly make your life wonderful. But it's about making lots of small changes. They don't have to be disruptive. We're not saying that suddenly like you're weighing and measuring your food and eating mung beans 5 times a week and going for like grueling runs. No. Just make small changes and live a balanced life. Life's also about having fun, so we want balance in it. But if you make those small micro changes over time, they compound into massive, massive transformation for you. And I think it's really important that we understand that. And I always say, like, an underestimated superpower is discipline and consistency. Just doing stuff and sticking to it will get you there.
Amazing, thank you. Really powerful. And also I'm just listening to that and just thinking, I need to listen to that. I need to make those really small changes and stick to them. I do lots of exercise, but it's things like, can I do yoga more? Can I stretch more? And can I be consistent with that? Because I do it for maybe 3 or 4 months and then I don't do it for the rest of the year, and I'm not seeing those improvements in the long term. Now, I might be completely dropping you in the deep end here, but I wanted to briefly discuss sleep and how hormones play into our sleep. I am not a sleep expert. I don't know enough, but my husband has recently got a Whoop band, and I find that really interesting. Technology aside, because I know it's all technically based on heart rate and different things like that, but how can we use hormones to or can we use sleep to potentially predict, or poor sleep to predict, hormone imbalances for example, maybe the fact that we're consistently only getting 4 hours of good quality sleep a night, does that suggest that maybe there's a hormone imbalance somewhere, or am I completely making that up?
No, no. Yeah, one of the best things we can do for our hormone health is ensure we're getting enough good quality sleep, because our hormone system needs good quality sleep to kind of recover, reset, and operate effectively. So disrupted sleep will have a big impact generally on our hormone system. Of course, one of the biggest disruptions on that is, if we're tired, we become stressed, and that's when we release the cortisol, the stress hormone cortisol. Now, that is really important to know about. So cortisol is like the alpha male hormone. It's naturally occurring for us. So it's meant to spike in the morning. It's a get up and go hormone. It fires everything up, and then it's meant to taper off through the day. But what happens in the modern world is spikes in the morning when we get up, and then as we go through all these micro stressors, it continues elevating through the day, because our stress response, again, it's an evolutionary survival response, right? If we're faced with a physical threat, we fire a chemical cocktail to basically fight or flight. And what that chemical cocktail does is basically shut down anything that's non-essential for actually fighting or flighting. So, blood is diverted away from digestive system, from the reproductive system. Pain receptors start to shut down, we get more injury risk. It shuts down serotonin production, dopamine production. All these things go on, which is fine if you are literally in that situation. But the thing is, our mind can't distinguish between a physical threat and, an angry email, getting stuck in a traffic jam when you're already late. So we're getting the same hormonal response, and that's into the same physical and emotional response. And basically, cortisol is made from the same mother hormone, progesterone, as our primary sex hormones, and it will take resources from every other hormone. So if we're stressed, it's taking that progesterone to make more cortisol, meaning we're decreasing our testosterone, estrogen, progesterone still further, still further, still further. So it's like a negative multiplier for all the effects we don't want from our hormones. So managing your stress is key, but also making sure you get enough sleep. And I read an interesting thing on this. So some new research out that basically says we're dreaming less than we used to. And they do think there's a link between tech, because the blue light stimulates melatonin, which actually is a sleep hormone. So we're struggling to get to sleep because we're looking at stuff on our devices. We're more stimulated, so we're finding it harder to get sleep. I mean, just not having enough sleep to get into that REM sleep. So our dream time's being impacted as well. And I find that just really scary.
Absolutely terrifying, because we obviously dream as part of our kind of our mental processing throughout life.
Yeah.
And I guess that also then potentially puts forward ideas of how it impacts dementia and Alzheimer's and all of those mental health conditions that develop later on in life. But I'm definitely going to look that research up, because it sounds really, really interesting. I could talk about sleep and hormones all the time, and for a very long time, because I love sleep. I have always been a really disciplined sleeper, like going to bed at 9 p.m, waking up at around 6. And I find it much harder now that I've got a lot more responsibility to be as disciplined, but still we're going to bed at 10 p.m, waking up at around 6. And I really appreciate it, because I have really good quality sleep, probably about 9 hours a night. Whereas my husband, who has bought the Whoop band just for that purpose, because he knows that he isn't getting sleep. He's going to bed at the same time as me, but he's just not sleeping very well. What and how do hormones play different roles depending on women and men? And what does that look like? Because I think I once heard somebody talking about how our reproductive system works or is optimized, or something's happening while we sleep, and so women need more sleep than men as a result of that, or something like that. But what's your opinion on that research, and what's your knowledge around that?
Yeah, so I think estrogen plays more of a role in sleep than testosterone, and women are obviously more estrogen dependent than men are. So that's why menopause, women, a common symptom is trouble sleeping or disturbed sleep. And it's interesting, there's a knock on them from that, because estrogen and the neurotransmitter serotonin, which is like our feel good, they have a symbiotic relationship. So when estrogen's low, then serotonin's also low. So side tip, tangent here, for any drinkers out there, particularly wines, the sulfites in wine actually lower estrogen, which is why as we get older, a lot of people feel that it's not just the hangover, it's the hangxiety the next day. The anxiety, low level anxiety comes with it. It's probably because the sulfites have lowered estrogen overnight, which then will have lowered serotonin, so it's low level anxiety. So that's part of the question. Sleep trackers. I went through a phase of wearing a Whoop strap as well, and it was really, really useful looking at heart rate variability and sleep recovery. I actually found after a time it became counterproductive because I was relying on it to tell me what my sleep had been like. So rather than waking up and checking in myself, like, did I have a good night or not? I was like, oh, let me check. Oh, I had a bad night. And then that instantly would kind of cascade through the day of, oh, okay, I didn't have a good night's sleep. So that's going to impact me. So I'd say trackers, I think, can be really useful for a short space of time to learn your patterns. But I'd be cautious of overly relying on them and then becoming a bit dependent on the data.
Yeah, a great point. And he said that already, like he's on the trial and he said, I'm not going to continue using it just because he's found that he's become so obsessed with that. And then he feels extremely low when he wakes up because he looks at his phone, which is telling him he's had 3 hours of good quality sleep.
Yeah.
So nobody wants to start their day already knowing that they're on the
Exactly.
back foot. Okay, so basically, so that I understand, estrogen plays a huge part in or impacts our sleep or our level of sleep.
As a sex hormone,
And then I can turn around and say I need more sleep than you because I have my estrogen it needs it.
Your system is more estrogen dependent than a man's system because it's your dominant hormone, whereas for men it's testosterone. But I'd say the other important hormone for sleep is melatonin. So again, as it goes dark, we should start to produce melatonin, which is like it's a sleepy hormone to a single light. But if we're looking at particularly blue light, that disrupts melatonin production. So this is why I'd say always switch off all your devices at least 1 hour, preferably 2 hours before bed. Because it's the blue light, number one, and then also the stimulus we get from whatever we're looking at there can kind of excite the brain. So that's another one there, definitely, and melatonin.
That's not just the blue light, it's not just phones, it's also TV.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people rely on falling asleep to TV, don't they? And what they're not realizing is that it's actually affecting their quality of sleep. Because I'm terrible for that, and I really want to start reading more so that I'm distracting myself. Like I love TV, and I had an amazing. Oh, I don't know where I heard this or read this, but they said Netflix's biggest competitor is sleep.
Oh, really?
And sleep's biggest competitor is Netflix.
Wow.
And it's a really interesting concept of how society is impacting our quality of life. Like we know that we need to do all of these things and there's a lot of companies pushing it, but the most successful companies may in fact be very detrimental without us even realizing.
Yeah. I'd say on sleep, one last thing is like don't underestimate the power of the good old nap as well. And there's a lot of research around this. So again, talking about the sleep cycles that we go through, if we want to daytime sleep, but then not impact our performance, the sweet spot seems to be like 20 to 30 minutes of sleep. So you might lie down for 40 minutes, give yourself that time to fall asleep. Because if we go actually into deeper sleep, like more than an hour and drip into the deeper stages, and we wake up, we're going to feel a bit more befuddled than if we had a lighter sleep, but the lighter sleep will actually refresh you.
And with napping, because I used to nap and I've grown up in a family that loves a nap, but my husband and his family, the complete opposite, like no naps are frowned upon. And I also am a little bit that inclined just because we're such go-getters and I'd much rather be doing things and getting things done than sleeping, especially during the day when it's light. I get light of day guilt where I'm like, if I'm not doing something and if I'm sleeping, that's not productive. What are the kind of key things to think about? Time of day, environment, what does that look like?
So I'd say learn to start tuning into your body, right? Like tune into your body and think, what does my body need right now? What's it telling me? You know, you might have days where it's like, you know, I'm really energized. I definitely don't need a nap. There are other days where, well, you know what, I've actually done quite a lot physically, and my body's telling me, and my sleep wasn't great last night, and my body's telling me that I should lie down for a bit. So learn to tune into that. I think in terms of timings, again, like early to mid afternoon seems to work best for most people. I think when we eat, we can often get quite sleepy. We take a lot of energy to digest. So the post lunch seems to be a really popular time for napping. You could argue that, you know, Latin countries have got it right with the siesta after their lunch, and then kind of then come back refreshed to do more stuff later on in the day.
And I'm conscious of time, so we will wrap up in a second. But what is your knowledge around glucose spikes and walking after meals?
Great
Because
question.
what I've recently heard is about, because my instinctual reaction was, oh, but don't we need to digest? So yeah, tell me more about that.
So I think we need to be really careful on this, right? This has come from the glucose monitors, and suddenly like everyone can monitor their blood sugar levels, but there's more and more scientists saying, you know what, unless you're diabetic, you don't really need to be monitoring your blood sugar levels. It can be quite interesting to see, oh look, I've eaten a biscuit, what's happened? But again, the danger is the data becomes a bit obsessive. So insulin is a hormone that we produce when we eat something, and basically, in very simple terms, it transforms the food we eat into energy for our body to use. It will turn it either into glucose or glycogen. If it's not used, then it will get laid down as fat. As we age, we become more and more insulin resistant, meaning that process is less effective. But we can train ourselves to become more insulin sensitive again. Again, it's by really minimizing sugars and make sure we're combining foods in the right way. So I've heard all sorts of things like people marching on the spot before they eat so they can avoid the glucose spike, making sure that they drink a glass of vinegar before. Now, listen, I think if you've maybe got specific health issues or diabetes, maybe, but I think we have to also put our sensible hats on and go, what do we want our life to look at? Do we want to say that before every meal we're gonna march up and down on the spot and then go for a walk afterwards? It's not really practical, and it's not going to make a big difference. More of a difference being made by making sure we're eating the right foods in the right way and just having movement generally in our lives.